Hanhola, if you can take the front seats, please. Thomas Nohe. If everyone can find their seats, please, we're going to begin the program now. As everybody is aware, today is Chof Beis Shvat, the Yortzeit of the Rebbitzin, and as it is B'Hashgacha Pratis, tonight, going right into the next day, is the day marking the Shloshim of a Rav HaChosid, Harav Atomim, Rabbi Moshe B'Reboshe Zelig, Herson, Olav Shalom. My name is Mendel Dubov. I'm an Aiden by Rav Osher Herson. I'm a Shliach in Sussex County, New Jersey, and I'll be having the honor of leading this evening. As we all know, the theme that the Rebbe placed as that which was going to be the hallmark of the entire year after the passing of the Rebbitzin was the Pasuk, V'hachai yiten el liboy, that those living in this world, those who are chosen for their neshamas to continue the shlichus of all our ancestors in this world, ought to take to heart the lessons of the lives of those who came before us, the lessons of the lives of those who set an example for us to lead and to continue the shlichus lahavi l'mois HaMashiach. We all here knew Rabbi Herson in different ways. To many of us sitting here, it's a family who was a Zaidi, a very dear Zaidi, father obviously to his children. To many of us sitting here, we have the schus of being a part of this moisid in its various departments, and I'll be using a little bit of Yiddish tonight, if that's okay. When I spoke with Rabbi Herson, it was in Yiddish. And those of us which in the past and the present have been part of this moisid haben adurchgearbeitet and adurchgeschwitzt, worked through, many of us, decades, shouldering the burden of the Rebbe's moisid here, and in general, the Rebbe's moisid in the state of New Jersey, under the leadership of Rabbi Herson. There are those who knew Rabbi Herson as what could be very honestly called a statesman of Yiddishkeit, somebody with a stately character who was a great fundraiser and someone who was a spokesman for Lubavitch and for Yiddishkeit in general in this state, but also nationally and internationally known and seen as somebody who wore the mantle of Yiddishkeit and Lubavitch and the representation of the Rebbe in the most dignified and honorable way. To many of us, especially young ones among us, the Bochrim, he was a special chassid. A chassid, somebody who was a Baal Shmua, someone who was by the Rebbe right from the get-go, from Tafshin Yud, and who sat by Alter Chsidim, and who had an uncanny chush, an uncanny ability with transferring the inyonim of Chassidus and the stories of Chassidim down to us, to the next generation, with the dozens and scores of stories and anecdotes that we had the schus to hear from him. All of these aspects of Reb Moshe were and are things that we can each learn from, and as it will obviously be that this evening those who are speaking will draw lessons from each of those and maybe other aspects of him. But I believe that to open this evening, we can remember, we can all recall that which was Oile al Kulona, that which was something which was the overarching theme of who he was somebody who was a soldat, a soldier, someone who Yom Yom Yidrushun, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, every single day came in and took the responsibility of his various achrayasin with all his koiches, with everything that he had and was able to bring. He brought to here, to Morristown, to the yeshiva, to the various departments of the yeshiva, to the shlichus, to the realm of Hafotza, to the realm of Lubavitch in general, was there devoted every day to doing what he felt and knew he had to do. That was who he was, and then as an overarching theme, that would be something for all of us to take away in the realm of V'hachai Yitein Liboy. The Mishnayos were distributed to be learned over the Shiva, and it is now my schus to call upon my shver, Rav Osher Zelig Herson, to make the siyum on the Mishnayos. Rabbi Osher Herson is the regional director of Chabad of Northwest New Jersey, and in that capacity also to speak not only as a child, but to somebody who has the schus of continuing his father's shlichus over here in the state. I'd like to ask also, due to the nature of this evening, there's a time and a place for everything, but if you could please hold back your applause for the duration of the evening. Thank you.
As Rabbi Dubov just said, as the Rebbe emphasized over and over again, the agenda of tonight's gathering is V'hachai Yitein Liboy, to learn from my father, from our father, and to be able to walk out of this room. That's the agenda, and with God's help, we'll succeed. To walk out of this room with a piece of not only my father and my mother, but something that will guide us in everyday life. I speak for myself, and with God's help, with everyone else as well. There's no question, it's very hard to size up a person, in a few minutes especially, but there's no question that a defining characteristic, if not the defining characteristic, but certainly a defining characteristic of my father was his masrus. Masrus is a very important word that Rebbe uses often. It comes from the word Moshe, to give yourself over to the cause. But we're talking about a selfless, and we're also talking about a very loyal dedication that knows of no boundaries. The Rebbe speaks of Sicha and Pasha's boy. When Hashem tells Moshe, boy imi, it should say obviously go to Pari, not Lecho. It should say Lecho Pari, not Boyo Pari. And the Rebbe says there's two nukudas there. Number one, that Hashem is saying to Moshe, you're saying you can't accomplish yourself. Komm mit mir. Come with me. If you come with me, you will succeed. And that is the Lashon Bai. Bai means to come. But the Rebbe adds there, Bai has a deeper understanding that complements the first, and that is that Bai is like Bai ala teva. Immerse yourself. There has to be what the Rebbe calls there, that's a quote, Hismasrus pnimis ushlema, a total, loyal, selfless dedication to the cause. And through that, you will succeed. My father not only exemplified this in many different ways, but he personally talked about it and encouraged others to do the same very forcefully. So it would not be a stretch to say that is a defining characteristic. And he felt that he learned this, amongst other things, we're a boss of Adam, but from the Rebbe, because we know, as my father once told me, in the name of the Kleisenberg Rebbe, who lived in New Jersey for a very long time, that the Rebbe once said about, the Kleisenberg Rebbe once said about the Rebbe's Chassidim, he's spoiled greatly from the Rebbe's Chassidim. The Rebbe tells him, learn 3 chapters a day, Rambam, this is the Kleisenberger's word. And it's a pala. And they actually do it. I'm translating from the Yiddish, we actually do it. But you know why the Rebbe merited to have such chassidim, the Kleisenberger said? Because he was totally b'hismastus and hiskashtus to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And because that's the way he conducted himself, that's the way why he has such chassidim. My father repeated this to me a number of times, but certainly was very much in line with his thought process. I've been thinking a lot over the last number of days about what I remember from the early years. My father, in the earlier years in Newark, which some remember, but in the earlier years in Newark, had a tremendous amount of dedication, and he wrote into the Rebbe that he felt that he's not worthy of the position, but nonetheless, he put a tremendous amount of his masrus into building the institution and running the institution. There were often times, quite often to my understanding, that he didn't take pay. Now, to the best of my knowledge, my father never missed a payroll for anybody. But nonetheless, when there was no funds, so he made sure everyone was paid, but for himself he didn't. I heard this from my mother, and I heard this from my father. Maybe I heard it from my mother more from my father, but I definitely heard it many times. My father lived very simply. I remember we had, and maybe my brother and sister remember as well, he had a car, I think it was a Chevy Impala, and it was a treat for us as kids because the front of the car, if you sat in the passenger seat, in those days you were allowed to sit in passenger seats, there was no restrictions, not seat belts or anything. So you had, in front of the car, the floor of the passenger seat was rusted out. And there was a mat right on top of it. And without the mat, if you go over a puddle, you get a spritz, you get a shower. So that was it. But when it wasn't raining, we would love as kids to pick up the mat to see, with the road. To us, it was a lot of fun. But thinking back, though, my father didn't choose this model from the sales lot. This was the Metzias. Never felt any problem with it, but this was the Metzias. And he worked incredibly hard to be able to fill the role that the Rebbe gave him. I know that I heard a number of times that Rabbi Shalom Gordon, Olav Shalom, who was a tremendous yedid and mentor and a very tremendous supporter of my father personally, but he would take him to show him how to fundraise. And to my father, this was foreign. For those who know my father, maybe it's hard to understand, but this was foreign. And one time, Rabbi Shalom Gordon takes him into a balabos, and then slowly walks out So when my father turned around to ask Rabbi Gordon, to intervene, Rabbi Gordon was not there. So he was sort of pushed into the position of having to deal with soliciting for the yeshiva to keep the yeshiva alive. Me personally, I remember very strongly in 1988 when we started our Chabad Center. My father had a secretary, Mrs. Kornfeld, many may remember her, and she lived in White Meadow Lake. And she wanted desperately to have a Chabad Center there because there was no Frum institution in the area. And she came with a group of 4 families, I think, and asked my father to be able to establish something. My father asked me if I would go. I said, I'll do the best I can. I wasn't sure. And we didn't have funds. I was teaching at that time right here at the yeshiva and living across the street at the student housing. And I was traveling back and forth to Rockaway. And we would go with our child and then children for Shabbos, and we'd bring our own food, and every right turn the children would spill in the back. And there was it was a project, not the end of the world. But to go to there, and she wanted so much to have a minyan, and so on. And I told my father after a while, I don't see where this is going. Because we're going back and forth. It's a lot of effort. And it's a middle-income community. I don't see the support. I don't see the support of people. And I asked my father, I'm not sure I see where this is going. I remember how powerfully my father answered me. When I say powerfully, with tremendous compassion. But he told me, you have 2 choices. Either you can give up or try harder. Now, that may seem very simple, but that crystallized everything in my mind. Because I knew, greatly because of my upbringing, that giving up was not an option, so there's only one option left. I'm not a mathematician, but this I knew, and it was to try harder. And try harder we did. But to give over, and I think my father knew that that's a choice I would make, but bottom line is to educate with this Ismasus as well. I remember sitting with my father not that long ago. He gave a class on Zoom at 8 o'clock for different Balabatim. During his years in West Orange, he would give classes, and he was very, very immersed in them. Now that he was living in Morristown, he gave a class over Zoom. And I was sitting with him, it was like 5 to 8. And I knew he was going to give his class, and I was going to go. Chaim would come and set up the Zoom every week. And tremendous appreciation has to go out to Chaim, my sister Samalki, who literally waited on my parents for the last 5 years, and not to exclude the other years, hand and foot every single day. Every breakfast, lunch, and supper, taking care of every needs, literally from A to Z. So Chaim would come and to set up the Zoom. So my father told me, I don't have the koyach to give this class. So I thought he was asking for my response, which I was about to say, compassionately, that if you can't, you can't. I was going to say something like that. I don't remember exactly. But he preempted me. He looked at me, he says, this is something that has to be done. And with that, I didn't have to say a word. He walked out, he sat down by the Zoom, and he gave his class. So the Hismasrus was a shita. Every single person, a shita of Ateda, but he considered this his defining characteristic. There's no question. This was told to many people at many different times. That there's people who are blessed with incredible intellect. There are people who are blessed with incredible talents in many different areas. But without his masters, without that total faithful dedication, that cannot happen. It's not going to happen. This is the bottom line. This is the main thing. And this is how he considered himself in his main area. I just feel I must add that when we talk about his masters and that dedication, there's many other illustrations, and time is short, so I'm not going to share them. However, there are circumstances where a person may say, his masters, that's wonderful. But what about a person who has a family, who has a wife, who has children, or his masters of a woman who has a husband and has children? So it may seem like a contradiction. And the fact of the matter is that this is what the Rebbe asked of us, and it can't be a contradiction. But how is it so? I can just tell you. And I have been thinking a lot about my childhood years in Newark and in West Orange. Until I went to yeshiva at 11 and a half and lived with my grandparents, it was a different phase of life for me. When my father was very busy building the yeshiva, but he took me with him practically wherever he went. When it was possible, of course. I remember fondly, and it's a vivid memory, that I would go to the yeshiva in Newark and I would be busy in his office playing with the adding machine. And then I would go visit the Bachrim, and they always had interesting comments to share with me. And then I would go down to the kitchen and visit Mrs. Pirak, who would give me all kinds of catering and so on, for those who remember Mrs. Pirak, Aleh Shalom. And then I would be able to schmooze with Rabbi Minkowitz, and sometimes with Rabbi Sol Friedman. But I was there. I was in so many times, but this is a main part of Ismasus and Shlichus in general, that make sure the children are with you as much as is possible. And I try to do that very much myself, as much as is possible, because they're part of it. And when they're part of it, I remember feeling, even though my father was super busy, I remember feeling zero void. That's just me. Zero vacuum, zero void, because we're always hanging out. And that continued when we were looking for a new campus, and we went as a family to look for the new campus. It was together as one. I remember when we first moved here to Morristown, it was all woods for most of the area. It was miles of woods. All these houses you see all around, they weren't there. But he would pack in my bike when, of course, I didn't have school and so on. He would pack in my bike in the car, and I would ride around, and there were trails and so on. There were other families living here, but back and forth. Sometimes at the end of the day, he would go for a swim with me in the swimming pool. But I remember hanging out with my father, and to me, I had a ball. I don't know what to say. This is my personal recollection, but this is the way it's supposed to be. Involve your family. His masters is incredible, but make sure that your family is part of that his masters. And to me, my father put a tremendous amount of effort to be able to do so. But there's also no question that it's a team together. Without my mother, because there's times that my father would stay at a late board meeting. And my father would have to have late meetings at night. And he was not there to read me a bedtime story. So there, the above wouldn't apply. But my mother, and she told me this many times, I remember, because Tati, my father, was doing such incredible work, and what he was doing to build the yeshiva and to build Yiddishkeit. And she praised it, and she applauded it. We all felt proud of what was being done. And my mother was a tremendous staple of this teamwork. But this I remember vividly and very clearly. So the Hismasdus is something that has to be a family event to be able to be successful. And my father, in my formative years, tried with every bone in his body to make sure this was so. And because I wasn't able to speak at Shloshim, and forgive me for going over the time, we'll do the same momentarily. But I remember my father telling me about my mother, that my father once faced a very serious challenge. And he wrote into the Rebbe for brachas and received. But I remember him telling me this, I remember very vividly. When I talk to Mommy, I feel like a different person. She's able to understand things. She's able to explain things. And I heard from her a number of times, sie is a kluger. She's so smart, including recently. When I say recently, 5 years ago, and so I'm thinking of a particular event. But she's so smart. But this was a circumstance. This is masters and the binyan and so on is a result of all the above. So, the bottom line that I wish to humbly convey is the defining characteristic, if not the defining characteristic that a person should know, that to be a chassid, to be a Jew, to be a shliach, the number one item is his masters. That total dedication that knows of no compromise. And that his masters was illustrated, like I say, in so many different ways, including not going to even visit Brazil when he came over, as many people know, and so on. My first time that he physically saw my grandmother was by the 12 years later by the wedding. But his masters was as a bocher, without question. His masters was with building Newark and then Morristown. His masters was as a shliach. His masters was as a chassid. And if I can live up to this a little bit more, I can't emulate, but if I could live up to it a little bit more, and if we collectively can, this will not only be a living extension, as the Rebbe explains, of my father down here in this world, but becomes, as the Rebbe uses the terminology, his hands and his feet to make this world into the kavanah for which it was created, and will be zecher immediately to the coming of Mashiach. Amen. To connect this to the Siyam is, and again I apologize for going over. Rabbi Shulman Levi says, that Hashem will give Shin Yud Eilumus, Shai, 310 Eilumus to all Chol Tzadik Vet Tzadik. Those Medayik that Rebbe gave out for the Shloshim of the Rebbetzin. Today's the yard site. They gave out from a talk from Yutas Kislev Tashlam Ches. They gave out for the Shloshim Tafshin Memches. Rebbe gave out and has tremendous diukim in this Mishnah. You could look there. Then it says further, there's no vessel that's machzik bracha that can hold a bracha, the Yisrael el ha-shalom, the concept of shalom. That Hashem gives us strength so we should be able to be shalom. The Rebbe is medayik. The meaning of shalom is, of course, the tivuch, the combination, the combining of two perceived opposites. Perhaps, as we just talked about before, his masters and mishpacha. How do the two go together? They not only can go together, they must go together. But to do this, you need, the Rebbe says, no, it's klatzim seifon. The very beginning of Mishnayos, this is at the end of the Mishnah, which was studied by many. We appreciate more than words can say. Everybody participating in the Chulukas and Mishnayos. The Rebbe once said by the Rebbetzin, this gave me a kodesh ruach. It's printed. A kodesh ruach, a tremendous amount of kodesh ruach. You probably understand the translation. If not, we'll do it later. And then the Rebbe said again, it's all printed. A kodesh ruach, a great kodesh ruach, that everybody finished the Mishnayos together for the Rebbetzin Chana at that time. So when the Rebbe spoke about this, talking about the beginning of the Mishnayos, and the beginning of Mishnayos talks about when do you read the Shema? Shema is the meaning of Kabbalah's oil. And the Rebbe said the two are wedged, the beginning is wedged into the end, not Klasim Sefer. You can't have a tivuch of two inyanim. You can't have a combination of two things that seem to be contradictory, and they're not, without an incredible Kabbalah's oil Kabbalah Yisrael means a tremendous acceptance of the yoke of heaven, a discipline, or included in that without question is his masters. That his masters is in making sure that those two things never sever. On the other hand, you can't have true shalom, so you can't have Kabbalah, you can't have shalom without Kabbalah Yisrael. But you also can't have Kabbalah Yisrael without this concept of shalom. If you're not using your his masters to bring a unification of what would seem to be opposites into this world, that is something that one can't exist without the other. And this is therefore the pair, the beginning and the end. The Kabbalah Yisrael and the his masters. And making sure there's never any conflicts, not between people, not between topics, and knowing that the Rebbe gives us the ability to combine the two together. That's the beginning of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah is the beginning of life, the end of life, and without question, as the words Mishnah mean or spell out the words neshama, as the Rebbe points out, as is well known as well, that this connects us to the neshama, who is right here with us, right here, not far away, as the Rebbe said explicitly. When you say the neshama leaves the body, it does not mean in some other stratosphere, but right here together with us, kipshute kemashmoi, my father and my mother, and they're standing with us and looking with us. I hope they're having nachas from what is going on as far as I'm concerned. But one thing is for sure, they are here and they are looking. And without question, the connection to the neshama is much stronger, and we should be zeichet to be able to stay connected to the neshama that gives them tremendous nachas ruach, as the Rebbe says again, that nachas ruach causes a tremendous elevation, because when a person has gratification, that causes elevation in this physical world. The same thing is with the neshama. That's a chavav, tavshim and beis. You can look, that's an incredible word, and we merit to be reunited together here as one with Mashiach Tzidkenu V'mheira V'yameinu Amen. Pardon lach shisha to say the mission, pardon lach daken lach shisha to the mission, daken lach and shem and after the shita to the mission, plus the shem nan, lama adain, lama abad the asay. Kaddish to the bottom. Iskada, Iskada, Shmei Rabo. Yom Dibrach, Rusevian, Lech Mechuseviat, Mach Bekane, Vikar, Mishichai. Yechayechan, Yemechan, Vachai, the Chol Beis Yisrael, Bagol of Islam Karev, Imru, Amen. Eheshmei Rabo, Mevarach, Laman, Rome, Omaya. Yisbarach, Yishtabach, Yisbarach, Yisrael, Yisnasei. Yisrael, 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 Shmei, Yisrael, Yisrael, Leila mikada chassid v'shilasa v'shvachasa v'nachmasa v'midan v'yamar v'imru amen. Ay Yisrael v'alabonim v'alkavadei v'alkol kavadei samadei v'alkol mandaskim v'laisa v'yasradei v'di v'chol asab asab v'yel haim v'koim shom rabba v'chinin v'chista v'rachim v'chayin v'richin v'zein v'divcha v'kana mikada mavuin v'yishmayu v'imru amen. Hey Shalom Rabbi v'shalai v'chayin kevim alein v'alkol Yisrael v'imru amen. Es shalom im name of Hu Yas Shalom Aleinu v'Yalkol Yisrael v'Imru Amen.
Yashakayach, and a bracha for Arichas Yomim V'Shonim Tevis to my shver Rabbi Herson. Not long ago in the Chumash, or actually it's going to be in the Chumash soon, where Rashi quotes the Maimah Chazal, the Ein Lecha Yofeh Min Atznius. There's nothing more beautiful than modesty, dignity, or in our context, of things done quietly. We spoke about this when it came to the Shloshim of Mrs. Herson and my Bobby, Mrs. Herson, who personified this value. But without, let's say, in Prosta Yiddish, on Machen Agrese Tzimis, without making a big deal of this, I want to echo what my Shver said and give a bracha to children in general, but particularly to Rabbi Brofman, and particularly particularly to Mrs. Sarah Brofman, the Eibishter Zayach Geben, that the devotion that you showed to the Zayda and the Bobber, to Rabbi and Mrs. Herson, Zodich Beistein, in Allen Yonim Begashmis Uberuchnis, it profoundly inspired us, the family, as we looked on and tried and helped in the best way we could. And we soll euch nutzen, this tremendous devotion that you have, auf freiliche Sachen, auf gesunde Sachen, tomit kol hayomim, und der Leben Mashiach Tzidkenu, bekorev mamish. With that, I'd like to ask Mendy Brofman to come over and to represent Mrs. Sarah Brofman. Thank you.
Close to 70 years of leadership, a mission, an unwavering dedication to the Rebbe's global mission. Our grandfather never took a vacation, never took time off. He spent every single day of his life building, accomplishing, and marching forward. No matter the challenge or obstacle, he was focused and determined. He was a true general. How did he get here? Born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, into a traditional Jewish home. At the young age of 9, he awoke to commotion coming from downstairs. He heard his mother repeating over and over, "Die Schiff ist untergegangen." The ship has sunk. We have no captain. His father had tragically passed away. Being the youngest son, he would always accompany his father everywhere he went, now left with a big void. Rabbi Weinberg, who was visiting Brazil, suggested that he should go to yeshiva in New York for a brief period and then return to Brazil to pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. At the age of 15, and with his mother's blessing, off he went, arriving to a country, language, and culture that was foreign to him. The adjustment was hard. He would say every time he looked up to the sky and he saw a plane flying overhead, he would feel homesick and yearn to return home to Brazil. But after some time, he started to form a connection with the soon-to-be Rebbe. It was then that his mission and purpose in life was crystallized. The Rebbe became his captain, and he would spend his entire life navigating his ship in accordance with his captain's orders. He would often say he had plans to become a doctor, but instead became a doctor of divinity. He took the Rebbe's message and he marched forward, becoming a leader, a visionary, and a trailblazer. The Rebbe added him to Agudas Chasidei Chabad to be an example to others to build and expand. Our grandfather never took anything for himself. During the early years of his connection and relationship with David Chase, his key supporter and partner, as they were driving in the car one day, Mr. Chase turned to my grandfather and offered to help pay for the down payment on his home. My grandfather politely declined, saying only for the institution. Many years later, Mr. Chase asked my grandfather if he remembers when he offered to pay for his home. He said, "If you would have accepted the money, I would have given it to you, but that would be the end." And here we are sitting on the David Chase campus. He saw my grandfather in MS, that he was here only for the mission, and he didn't want anything for himself. This was all accomplished with the tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, of my grandmother, who stood by his side, supporting and enabling him to accomplish this mission. Taking on more responsibilities at home and living a life of shluchos, while raising all of her kids on the same path, now Shloshim of New Jersey. My grandparents completed their mission here on earth less than a month apart from each other. They lived selfless lives, taking nothing for themselves. When the governor came to sit Shiva with my grandfather after my grandmother's passing, he probably thought he's coming to the dean's mansion, something big and magnificent. He arrived to a small 2-bedroom apartment. They chose a humble lifestyle and focused on helping others. There's hundreds of stories of parents not being able to afford tuition. If a student didn't arrive to yeshiva at the beginning of the year, my grandfather would call the mother and ask, "How come your son isn't here yet?" If she would say, "We don't have the finances worked out," he would respond, "Just send your son over and we'll figure it out later." Knowing that every dollar he didn't charge in tuition, he would have to go out and fundraise that money himself. He truly cared. And I always felt he cared deeply about his family and cared about me. When I would come to Morristown for Shabbos, he was so excited that I was there, he would always light up. He genuinely took interest in my life. He would always inquire how I am, what's doing, and ask how work is going. If I was traveling overseas, he always knew when I'm leaving and returning. A few years ago when I went to Poland, he sent me an email asking me to keep him updated and to send him pictures. The highlight for me was always sitting around the Shabbos table and singing together with him. He loved to sing. He would often become very emotional and moved during a song or when sharing a story of the Rebbe, whom he loved. To me, he was also the dean. I was proud he was my grandfather, seeing his strong, unbelievable connection to Shluchos and the Rebbe, and the strength and determination he had to persevere no matter what, has impacted me tremendously with a love and appreciation for the life he lived. He taught me to think big and utilize every moment for something important. He was a general who marched with strength and a grandfather who was soft and emotional. My grandfather never stopped working. If he had to go somewhere, he would take his work and papers with him. The one exception was when my brother went for surgery in Delaware. My grandfather insisted on being there, leaving all his work and papers behind. He sat in the hospital during the 7-hour surgery, saying Tehillim the entire time, and then took the long trip back home at the age of 80. What's the takeaway for all of us? What can we learn? No matter the challenge or obstacle one is facing in life, we can march forward. We can stay the course, as he would often say. Nothing was handed to him, nothing came easy. Over the last few years, as he battled a terrible illness, he never complained. He would always say, "Haida la'avar ubakasha la'asid." He's grateful for the past, and he's also asking for the future. He would say, "I'm not done. I have more to accomplish down here in this world, and that the Rebbe is watching over him. During his 90th birthday celebration for the family, he said proudly, "We just completed a $12 million building. But there's still one more building I wish to build. And it will be built," he said. He never got stuck. He always moved forward and did whatever needed to get done. This entire campus was built with his blood, sweat, and tears. Everything he built was done with the blessing and direction of the Rebbe. Divrei tzadikim chayim v'chayamim la'ad. The words of tzadikim, of the righteous, live on forever. The blessings the Rebbe gave continue forever. I'm sure when my grandfather went up to heaven, the Rebbe repeated again, Herson komit mir, and took my grandfather right in. His last wish was that he could be alive to greet Mashiach. This was his whole life, and he truly believed it. Although this wasn't meant to be, I'm sure he's praying that all of us should be able to very soon. I know my grandfather's watching over his entire family, his 3 kids, many grandkids, and great-grandkids. I know he's watching over the entire Rabbinical College of America, ensuring it will continue to educate and inspire future leaders. And over all the Shloshim and the 72 Chabad centers throughout the state of New Jersey. And that his work at Agudas Chasidei Chabad, the umbrella organization at Chabad headquarters, continues with the direction and framework set out by the Rebbe. Together we can embrace his mission and carry on his legacy by making sure that the institutions he dedicated his heart and soul to continue to grow and thrive. By doing so, we can carry forward his vision of educating and inspiring the next generation and spreading Judaism throughout the state and the entire world, and be reunited again with our loved ones with the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Amen.
There's a word that comes to mind when we are doing what we are compelled to do, Bisman HaGolus, of sitting at an event as such. And I just want to turn a little bit the focus to the majority of the crowd that's here, the young ones, Tzirei Chabad, the Tmimim. There is a word that I think when we listen and learn those sichos which are etched into our consciousness, say the sich of Purim Tovshin Mem Zayin, sich of Chof Ches Nissen Tovshin Nun Aleph, sich of Hoshana Rabbah Tovshin Nun Beis. There's a word that comes up to my mind, and that is the word agency. Agency in English loosely means to take achrayus, to take responsibility. You know, when Rabbi Herson was a bocher, Lubavitch was, that's what I heard once from a chassid, was you could fit it into a fruit bowl. It was 4.5 of everybody. And the question was, who was going to take agency? Who was going to take on the responsibility, number one, of Darkei Hachsidus, firstly and foremostly, of continuing and to grow the way of the Rabbeim, the way of Chabad, in the years after the war, in the years of the beginning when this was going to have to go on in America, it was very far from simple. And then, in the Rebbe's incessant call, in the Rebbe's constant cajoling and pushing, that the young ones should take on the responsibility of afotzas hayadus, of spreading Yiddishkeit, particularly in the realm of chinuch, particularly in the realm of education, within the framework of Moshe's Chabad, and then of afotzas hamayonis chutza, of spreading that limud achsidus and darkei achsidus should not just belong to a little shtibel, which 770 was, for all practical purposes, was a shtibel, was that size, that it should be something that should literally take over the entire world. All that was something that took those who were there to take on agency, to take on the responsibility on their own, that this would be this would be something that belonged to them, that they had to take on and carry forward. And when we are compelled at such a time to sit at such an event, the most obvious and straightforward that goes out to all of us, but particularly to the young ones amongst us, both young in age, as the Rebbe always said, young in age and young in spirit. That it is now that we have to speak about Beloshen Ovar, in a language in past tense, of a Chosid, of number one, who took the Hanhoga of Chassidus and Darkei Chassidus as his own. Not something that he saw in his parents' home necessarily, although the foundations were laid very, very seriously for that, but after all, came to America, and what should he be? And saw it that the Rebbe should be something that he took personally. And then moreover, v'oid v'hu ha'ikr, to take on kishor la'oil v'chachamer l'masol. I don't think there's any more perfect phrase to put this. As we're told, Chazal tell us that divrei Torah, that words of Torah, the way of Torah, should be taken on by those who take it seriously, like an ox takes on a yoke and like a donkey takes on a burden. To carry the burden of Torah, to carry the burden of Chassidus, and realizing that it's not a burden, but as the Rebbe would always say, it's carrying diamonds. But nevertheless, to take on b'kabolas oil, and to take on seriously, and with his masras, as we've heard, the Rebbe's way, the Rebbe's shlichus, and the Rebbe's moistus, is something that all of us, being compelled to sit at such an event, could take on as ours in a very, very simple way. Rabbi Herson was, for everything else, for us here, the Skana Chasidim. He was the eldest amongst all of us, who saw everything that an elder would have seen and heard everything that an elder would have heard. It puts us in the driver's seat. There's nobody who could say, well, they will do it. There's nobody that we could say, well, somebody else's business, even if subconsciously that might have been something that we could have told ourselves. Sitting here, it's something that we have to understand, that now it's Lokel Goymer Aloy. It's the Eibishter is saying, it's our turn. The youngsters among us, that we're going to land the plane. We're going to land the plane. And that, as inadequate as we may see that we are, as the Rebbe said in Bossi Legani, it's not about what you think you're worth, it's about where you find yourself. With that, I think the framework would be exact to invite Rabbi Mendy Herson to share some words. Thank you.
One thing I found, the shivas were fortunately so close to my mother and my father, was that it was a venue for people to share things about them that I didn't know, and I probably wouldn't have known if not for the Shiva. Somehow it released people, stimulated people to fill in little cracks that I didn't know yet about my parents' lives. This week, I got a voice note. I have many of them came along with and calls, and messages about now since my father passed away, about my father. From Yosef Yitzchok Jacobson, known as Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. He sent me a voice note, and he said he wanted to share 3 stories that he wanted to make sure I had in my repertoire. Spent more than 50 years. My father shared his life with me very often from when I was very young, maybe 6 or so. So I had more than 50 years of hearing from my father about his life. There's not much new I hear. The first 2, got it. But then he shared a story from his father, Olav Shalom, about my father, Hakam, that I'd never heard. Unless, Asher, you've heard it, or Samal, Shmuley. I'm going to say that maybe my father never heard it either. Yosef Yitzchak told me that Resh Chodesh Iyar, Tafshin Mem Hey, his father, Gershon Ber Olav Shalom, who was the publisher of the Allgemeiner Journal, was called into Yechidus by the Rebbe, which was an unusual thing. And without getting into the specifics which he gave me of why he went in, he spent an hour there speaking to the Rebbe about community things. But then the Rebbe started speaking to him about the Allgemeiner. And he said, I recently saw in the Allgemeiner a beautiful article about the Siyam Rambam in New Jersey. So it was the first Siyam Rambam, was Tafshin Mem Hey. And then he says, I was young, check with my brothers, but what I remember my father saying is that the Rebbe said to him that he was very happy with the article, and he said, "B'chlal bin ich zufrieden mit Moshe Herson. Macht gut." As a general rule, I'm happy. It said my father's name, macht gut. He does well. Got the voice note. I called Simon Jacobson. Said, do you remember this? He says, Tafshin Mem Hey, you know what I was doing? I was busy with things. Don't trust my memory. I trust Yosef Yitzchak more. I remember vaguely. I don't remember enough. I called Baruch. Baruch Jacobson said, he's correct except for one thing. I remember it. The Rebbe said, B'chlal bin ich sehr zufrieden mit Moshe Herson. I am very happy with what Moshe Herson does. Macht gut. I assume if my father would hear that, and not only is he hearing it now, from his perch, he heard it already, the joy he would have, that knowing that the Rebbe said, that he's giving the Rebbe joy, he'd be flying. I would have heard. I'm assuming he didn't know about it. But I want to share something about something about my father that I think we can all take home, something to think about. What does that mean? Macht gut. He does well. Good press. Got a nice crowd there in West Orange. What was it? Macht gut. Just my feeling. My father, before I get there, some people come out of the womb with a personality. They're a conqueror. They're a builder. They're going to make a tumult, and they're going to change the world. From my father as I knew him, and from my father as I think he knew himself the way he shared with me, my father's natural tendency was a connector, is a person of a lot of charisma and influence, but left to his own devices, he would have loved to be a teacher, helping people's lives, guiding people's lives in a nice, quiet way. he didn't look to be a general. He didn't see a general in him. The Rebbe showed him a general in him. And what my father was, before the Rebbe from 1950, he surrendered to allow himself to be molded by the Rebbe. Like a keli, b'yad ha'yetzer. His strength was that he didn't remain limited by his self-image. He surrendered and allowed himself to be fashioned in the image that the Rebbe saw in him. The surrender, which goes straight into his masters. My father in this yeshiva, and in coming from Newark also, every year I would hear him, and I'm sure I hear it from Rabbi Shapiro, his value. If you have said a bacher, and the Rebbe told him originally also that a bacher will come in talented, born on third base, so to speak, ready for success. So that's wonderful. They're a gift to the world. His celebration was a bacher who was able to move from point A to point B. They grew. They were allowed themselves to be molded by the yeshiva. This was his simcha. That's what he respected. That's what he celebrated. He allowed himself to be molded. He saw that as something really, as a lesson in life for all of us. So, on the Shloshim, as we go to the Chayit and Aliba to internalize, especially standing here in the Mosid that resonates with my father's spirit, not only his presence, but a spirit of his life. The idea of finding within ourselves quiet moment, davening, Krishma Shalomita, look at who we are, and think about who we can be, surrender to who the Eibishter wants us to be, who the Rebbe wants us to be, who Mashpia told you can be, and do that and think that there was a living example of that, who built this place, and maybe that will inspire you. Be a very big gift to my father.
One of the first stories I heard from Rabbi Herson was at my Ufruf, and he told over the Ishtalshalus, the order of events of how the yeshiva of Tiferes Bachurim was started. A very, very fascinating story, not for now, but in hindsight, we know there was a famous story with the Tzemach Tzedek, that Tzemach Tzedek was speaking about his life and the Tzemach Tzedek's achievements in writing Nigla and Chassidus and Rebbe, but the only thing that he saw was worth it all was making Baalei Tshuva, facilitating those who had not been able to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs to do so. And it is said, a story told by Rabbi Schallenberg Gansberg, a similar story about the Rebbe. Rabbi Chaim Brofman has been at the helm of Yeshiva Tiferes Bachurim for decades. I was supposed to hear from the Edom of Rabbi Herson, Rabbi Chaim Brofman.
To be honest, it's not easy to come to an event of a Shloshim. On one hand, to see the big crowd, everybody who turned out, it's very, very heartwarming, it's very, very comforting, sharing very, very, not just good memories, but important memories. But on the other hand, it reminds us, it's a painful reminder of the void, of the vacuum that's left. But the Rebbe directs us, as was mentioned many, many times, B'achayit and Aliboy, Chayit in Liboy, especially the way the Rebbe frames it, the way the Rebbe presents it, is something which is able to fuse both of these ideas together. Yes, we come together, we share, we reminisce, even celebrate. But Chayit and Liboy, it's something that we have to recognize the void. And as was mentioned before, it's our responsibility to fill that, to continue it, and to pay it forward. There's much that already has been said. There's much that will be said. There's a lot that needs to be said. There's a lot in my heart. As the Maimer Chazal Liba, the Puma Legalia, it's very hard to articulate everything that's on your heart. Just to focus on a couple of points in relation specifically to Tiferes B'churim, as was mentioned by Rabbi Dubov, the schus of working in this way said. Rabbi Dubov mentioned about the unique story about how Tiferes was established. For the past 5 years, having minyanim in our house, so that my father-in-law be able to participate and have a minyan. There were many occasions after davening where he would push himself to share, and we would have bochum over, and we would have Galite alumni, not just on those occasions, but over the years at our Shabbos table, Yom Tif very often in the later years. My Shver and Shriga would come to us. And on many occasions, the Baruchim having the opportunity of sitting at a table together with Rabbi Herson, would ask him, how did Tiferes start? How did Tiferes start? Tell us. Now I would tell you, and this I've heard this many times, the Baruchim, the Yungalite, would expect an answer along the lines of the Rebbe calling in my father-in-law and saying, I have this idea about Shuli Yeshiva in the early 70s, something revolutionary. Yes, there was already Hadar HaTorah, but something. And as I mentioned before, with the Hismasuros, with the dedication, the commitment of my father-in-law, he would take on that mission. But that's not the answer that they received. It was a little unexpected, a little jarring for them. My father-in-law told them, he didn't share all the details. He was a smart man. But the details that would be pertinent for them to learn something from. My father-in-law had the idea of making about Shuva Yeshiva. There were some requests, but there was opposition. Any good idea, there's going to be some opposition, there are going to be naysayers. And it's a very, very fine line to navigate. On one hand, you want to listen, you want to hear what they have to say, maybe they have a point. Yet on the other hand, you want to proceed further. And on one occasion, Yechidus, while this was going on in my father-in-law's mind, he presented this to the Rebbe. I'm also not going to go into too many details. He presented this to the Rebbe. And he got a very, very mixed message. On one hand, the Rebbe sort of validated the reasons behind the naysayers, the reasons behind some of the opposition. Yet on the other hand, the Rebbe told my father-in-law that such institutions in Russia were called Tiferes B'churim, as if giving him the encouragement and sort of the non-explicit sanctioning of doing this. And as my father-in-law said, he walked out of Yechidus and was very, very confused. What message am I getting over here? Yes, there's the Hismasuros. Where do I go from here? What do I do? Do I carry this further? Not. My father-in-law decided to proceed further, to speak to those that were in opposition, and to try to smooth over some of the differences, and eventually it got off the ground. And as my father-in-law would do on very, very often occasions, every move he would write a duch to the Rebbe. And for about a year or so, no answers about Tiferes B'churim. And again, confusion. Am I going in the right direction? Am I doing what the Rebbe wants me to do? But he sort of felt, and someone with that kind of ismasrus has that kind of antenna that's able to sense that although I didn't hear explicit instructions from the Rebbe, there's a certain sense, there's a certain sensitivity. You have to have one to know what I'm talking about. And after a year, he got a very, very beautiful answer. A very, very beautiful answer, encouraging him with the work of Tiferes. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. We have the benefit of hindsight now. How many hundreds, thousands of Talmidim have gone through Tiferes, because my father-in-law, this exemplifies, in my mind, a very particular aspect of being a shliach. In addition to the hismasrus, which of course is the foundation, which is, as the Rebbe spoke on a few different occasions, the shliach cannot expect to receive very, very specific instruction to do this, to A, B, C, and D. In the Sikha, the Rebbe quoted, told a story about the Frierdiker Rebbe, about a Mashuach that came into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, do this, do that, give me all the details. And afterwards, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, he's like a pampered only child, who, quoting, the Frierdiker Rebbe quoted from Yoina, where Yoina said, so uni vitiluni alayam. I'm ready, Rebbe, I'm ready. Hismasrus. Send me wherever you want. Pick me up and throw me into the ocean. But that's, sometimes we have to use our own ingenuity, our own vision, our own perseverance, and of course, having that antenna and checking and making sure that this is what the Rebbe wants. But not everything is going to be spelled out for you. So yes, Hismasrus, of course, is the foundation. And if you have the right Hismasrus, you develop that antenna. But not everything is going to be spelled out for you. That's one thing that he shared with the Bachar and with the Yungalite. Second point is to echo really what was said before. And this is something which was not an answer to a question. This is something that more in the later years is something which he initiated. That he made a point to go out of his way and share this with the Bachar. He's saying to the Bachrim, I'm telling you a lot of stories. Of course, they will tell me stories of the Rebbe, of your interactions with the Rebbe, and there were many. But after all, my father-in-law told the Bachrim, he says, I didn't come from a Chabad family, I didn't come from a Chabad background. And yet, I never felt from the Rebbe, all my interactions with all the things that the Rebbe trusted me with, I never felt from the Rebbe anything lacking because I didn't come from this Chabad background. As my brother-in-law said before, I wasn't born on third base. And he wanted to instill it in the Bachrim because this is a perception that plagues a lot of us. And the Rebbe spoke about this on many occasions, where a person says, Mi ani umani, was bin ich? Wer bin ich? Who am I? What am I? It's very, very easy to think that I do not have the wherewithal to be able to carry this forward. My father was telling them, look at me. Not in an arrogant kind of way at all. And if you were there, you would have felt the true humility. But look at me. He was trying to tell the Bachrim, okay, you don't come from a Chabad background. Whatever your background might have been. But you have it within you to do it. And this is something which he initiated. This wasn't an answer to some kind of question. He felt that this was a very, very important idea. And this is a lesson that, of course, that we can all take. I just want to conclude with one more point. The Shloshim is also an opportunity to recognize the debt of gratitude. On a personal level, for my family. I remember very vividly, it was mentioned before by Rabbi Weinberg. Rabbi Weinberg was the one who, we'll call him the facilitator, who facilitated all of this, bringing my father-in-law from Brazil. I remember at my chasana was a Chabad event, and he asked Rabbi Weinberg, he wanted Rabbi Weinberg to say something. My father-in-law always had that debt of gratitude to Rabbi Weinberg for bringing him. And Rabbi Weinberg spoke then, of course, he's going to speak about my father-in-law. And he quoted a pasuk and applying it to my father-in-law. Kol hayoim choynenu malve, v'zaroi levracha. Rabbi Weinberg's unique style. A whole day, choynenu malve, thinking about the klal, working for others, but that at the same time, as Asher mentioned before, v'zaroi levracha. V'zaroi levracha, it's not a contradiction. And perhaps just the opposite, that kind of example of being kol hayom choynenu malve brings about the Zara L'Bracha. How many times by our Shabbos table, just in Yom Tif, just being there, being that living malva, being an example, Kol hayom choynenu malva, brings about the Zara L'Bracha. Of course, I would tell you, it's like one of those experiments, don't try this at home. Unless you have someone like my shviger. Because otherwise this experiment doesn't work. So before you try this at home, be very, very careful. But it's the debt of gratitude. We have to recognize what was invested in us. And I dare say everyone in this room owes a great debt of gratitude. Sometimes we take that for granted. We walk around in this beautiful campus and we benefit in so many different ways. And sometimes we lose sight of what really goes on behind the scenes. It's really incumbent on us to recognize this. My father-in-law would have a term, patriot, someone who is loyal, someone who is getrai. Doesn't mean that you have necessarily a lot of money and you're a big donor, but someone who feels that loyalty, someone who understands and senses what goes in, what the investment that's being made. Shloshim is an opportunity to think about that, and to recognize the debt of gratitude, the impact. And of course, that places, as was mentioned before, this places a big responsibility on us. To pay it forward, to pay it back, to be getrai, to be loyal, and not to wait for a phone call, but like we mentioned before, to take the initiative to pay back that debt of gratitude. If we take these lessons and we carry it forward, we will not move on, but we will move forward. We can't move on. We can't move on from what's... It's hard. But we can move forward. And we have to move forward. And if we do so, we will give him a lot of nachas, which of course means, by definition, it will give the Rebbe nachas. And with Shiach and Heiro B'Yameinu Mamash.
I remember once hearing a speech from Rabbi Yitzchak Grona. Here, Shloshim who were with him, who were meshamish him, and there is a business in Sefer Yechezkel about the fact that Yechezkel was not necessarily somebody who had pischon peh, somebody who was able to speak. A whole thing, several times it comes up in the Sefer, and we just had in the Haftarah that the Eibishter finally tells Yechezkel, Ulecha etein pischon peh. To you, I will give the ability to speak, for your mouth to open. And the question is, Rabbi Groner in his unique way said, why is it uniquely among all the Nevi'im that Yechezkel is the one who has trouble speaking, and the Eibishter has to coach him, so to say, and then Ulecha etein pischon peh. The answer is simple. I believe he quoted the Medrash, something I couldn't find. But the answer is simple. Yechezkel lived in one of the most dire times that ever befell Klal Yisrael, which was the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash. There was a group of Yidden that came to Yechezkel, and they took it as self-understood that the party was over. The story's finished. It was nice to have Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. It was a good run for 1,000 years, and now, the world goes further. And it was Yechezkel who had to tell them that that this will not, before the Eibishter has an eternal covenant, an eternal bris with Klal Yisrael, something that will run till the end of time. But for somebody to be in that position at that kind of time is not necessarily something that could be taken for granted. Who are you to speak? Who are you to say? Who are you to go and lecture Yidden who have just gone through the most unspeakable of tragedies? What was that gave Yechezkel the ability that the Eibishter said, Ulecha etein pischon peh, to you I will give the ability to speak? It was that Yechezkel had the experience and the nevuah of Atzomis HaYeveshes. That Yechezkel was the one who the Eibishter took and said, you are going to be the one to be menabed, to prophesy over the dry bones in the famous Haftarah that we read, and to be Machayim Mesim, and to set the precedent for Tchias HaMesim Kipshutoi, and Tchias HaMesim in its broader sense of bringing Yidden and Yiddishkeit back to life. Said Rabbi Groner, and I will remember this, if you are the one who are going to be Machayim Atzomis HaYeveshes, if you are the one who's going to go and take the responsibility of being there in a Moshe Chinuch, of educating Yiddish children and young adults to go in the ways of Torah, Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, Ulecha etein pischon peh, then you are the one who can speak. And if you don't, all right, he had a way of saying that. If you're not the one who's going to go and take on the responsibility, is was effenster moil. Who are you to speak? Particularly the ones who are going to go and be Machayim Mesim, and the ones who are going to go and take the achrayas of a moisid and working in a moisid, and to take the responsibility, the gashmis and beruchnius, are the ones we can look up to, and the ones we can take the most profound lessons from. In that light, I would like to invite the longest standing Hanhola member of the Hanhola of Timchet Mimim, the key moisid that we are standing in, for Rav Shalom Shpalter.
I heard from a member from the Hanholos HaYeshiva many years ago, Rabbi Yisrael Gordon, but I was enlightened by other chaverim of mine that Rabbi Herson, Rabbi Moshe Herson, would always chazer this word as well. So in lieu of an hemshech to everything that was spoken until now, I'm just going to mention this word because Rabbi Herson heeft zich eigen kochen in the word. David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Miyale Bahar Hashem Umiyokum Bimkeim Kochei. So there's actually a sikha from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe mentions Chelik Yud, a word from Frierdiker Rebbe in a Maimer, Miyala Bahar Hashem, that when you're going up on a mountain, you have to make sure never to stop in the middle. Because if you do stop, Chas v'Sholem, you can slide back. Miyala Bahar Hashem, you have to make sure continuously go up more and more and more and more. But there's a Vaisis Apelisha word, and they, Moshe would chazed this a lot, that Miyala Bahar Hashem, that's a way that everybody can accomplish if you, as we mentioned before, with these masters and the giving yourself over, you can actually make it to the top. But the chokhmah is that once you make it to the top, you remain on the top. Umiyokum bimkeim koche, that you remain there. And the way to remain there is to continuously going higher and higher and higher. Because when you reach the top and you feel, oh, I made it, I'm here, I accomplished so much, what is there left for me to do? That in itself can bring you chas v'chalil to start slipping back. So the chokhmah is a miyokum, that you remain at the top, and the top is an everlasting, as the Rebbe speaks in the Maimer. And so l'mayla mayla adin l'mata mata adin tachlis, l'mayla mata in ketz, l'mata mata in tachlis, l'mayla in ketz. There is always to go higher and higher and higher. This is an example that we all saw by Rabbi Moshe, and in particular in the last couple of years of his life, you even saw it even more. I happened to meet him a few times in the last couple of years, and I was always in awe how much a Yid in this age and in this situation, Begashmi, that he was in, had the ability to come into work and to go and drive himself over and over and further. As he was an inspiration. Al Kapanim, to me, he definitely was an inspiration. I'm sure to everybody else he was an inspiration as well. Rabbi Moshe was my boss for many years, all the years. I was not a family member, but I can just tell you that me, myself, in my personal life, he was, besides being a boss, a caring person as well. I myself went through a certain situation 5.5 years ago, and that situation, I actually made a fabrengen in my house just a night before I was supposed to go through a certain procedure, and Rabbi Herson found out that I'm doing it. He came running to the house to stop it, because I was supposed to go the next morning into a certain situation. And he cared so much that he was there to make sure that I'm not doing anything, that I'm not working, and I'm not serving, and so on and so forth. And he even went further than that. He did something to make sure that it's going to be good. I mean to say, he was a boss, and when he was a boss, he was a tough boss. However, when it came to personal life, he was a varmer mensch. Being a chassid as well, he was a ibigegeben chassid to the Rebbe. While I was sitting over here, I reminded myself the story. I don't know why I reminded myself the story. When it was the Rebbe's 85th birthday, the Rebbe said then that if anybody wants to give him presents, I should give out sforim, kefsim. And then they gave out from every Medina, every country, they gave out a kavitz of the Rabbonim from that Medina, that related in honor from the Rebbe. The United States is divided into 50 countries, 50 Medinas. So New Jersey was one, we gave out a whole sefer called Ateres Chachomim. And the Rabbonim around, at that time, the Kolessenberger Rebbe lived in Union City. And we made an appointment by him to go meet him. And it happened to be that I went, Rabbi Herson went, and I went along with him. Rabbi Greenberg went along, all of Shalom. At that, when we're going to the car, Rabbi Herson put on a satug, put on a long baguette. And okay, so some of the people in the Hanola wore long baguettes the whole time, but Rabbi Moshe was not wearing it. Wearing a short jacket, and he put on a long jacket. So when we go into him, I see he's wearing a long jacket. I said, "No, Rabbi Moshe, no dem gartel." So he became like, A gattel no beim Rebbe. In other words, yeah, from derech eretz, you're not going to wear a short jacket, you put on a long jacket when you go into Glezer Rebbe. Aber a Rebbe, ich ein Rebbe, mein Rebbe, zu seiner Übergegebenkeit in des Kastus zum Rebbe was known, in seiner Übergegebenkeit. No, so the Rebbe to helfen. This, all the speeches we heard so much, I just want to echo it all and say that Rebbe shall geben, so sein Aliyas and Neshama, just to bring it out that here is today's Shir Rambam mentions twice the Shloshim. Today's Shir, the Rambam mentions Shloshim twice or three times, even though the Rambam doesn't talk about what the halachas in Shloshim. He says morgen the Shir is going to talk about the halachas in Shloshim, what you do up to Shloshim. But the Rambam mentions is interessant. The Moshe also learned had a kaviyas to learn with a chavrusa, the Rambam, in his office with a and they wish to help him, soll sich sehen, Mashiach will come soon, we will kitzel ran Mashiach the offer, behu b'seicham, and everybody b'seicham, to zecher sein, the Gula Mitzvah Shlema.
We'll use the opportunity of giving Rabbi Spalter a bracha, Yarech Yomim al Mamlachtoi, Gesundheit und Freilichkeit. In Torah and Yiddishkeit, there's a title that's given to a person who is oisek b'tzorchei tzibur, who is a community person who is bound and engaged with the needs of the community. There's lots of things said about a oisek b'tzorchei tzibur. The Torah validates the fact that the life of one who is oisek b'tzorchei tzibur is very different than the rest of us. As Rashi says in Parshas Behaloischa, when it came to the two Nevi'im, who were Eldad and Medad, who were giving Nevi'us, and Yeshua said to Moshe, Adoni Moshe Kloim, Moshe, stop them, make sure they don't say what they're saying. What did he mean? He said, Hatel aleim tzorchei tzibur, put on them the needs of the community, ve'im kolim me'eleim, and they'll stop prophesying very, very quickly. We say every Shabbos that somebody who's oisik b'tzorchei tzibur be'emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishalem schoram. We ask that Hashem repay those who are engaged in the needs of the community. And whoever said it said that those who are oisik b'tzorchei tzibur be'emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishalem schoram. It's the Eibishter and only the Eibishter who truly repays them for what they do, because as we know, frankly, very often it's a thankless task. But it is the highest calling that is possible for us to take on. As the Rebbe himself said to Rabbi Herson about the fact that one who is oisek b'tzorchei tzibur, one who takes on the role of doing for that which the community needs, stands on a more lofty level than someone who is Torah Yom Nosei, more on a lofty level than someone who is engaged in Torah, on the level of Torah Yom Nosei, that their lives are defined by Torah. But as we know, there is no such thing as one who can provide for the community without those who stand locked in arms, shoulder by shoulder with them, to provide and to make sure that that happens. Rabbi Herson had there's a schus to work with those people who stands als ein Gesund for the needs of this institution and, broadly speaking, for the Chabad institutions in New Jersey. I mentioned David Chase, but we have over here a very, very special person to represent the board, somebody whose name even in Sussex County we hear of, Mr. Miles Berger. We ask Mr. Berger to come up and share a few words.
It's my honor to speak here today on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Rabbinical College of America. Rabbi Moshe Herson, Zichron Tzaddik Livracha, lived a beautiful life, a life devoted to Torah and mitzvot, a life dedicated to family, to wife and children, a life dedicated to Yiddishkeit, following the great traditions of Chabad and of its leader, the Rebbe. And on equal par with all of these attributes, a life devoted to educating the next generation of Chabad rabbis who will become Shluchim internationally throughout this world. And I'm speaking to the young Bachurim here today. His life was dedicated to the Rabbinical College of America, as we've heard. From its very beginning on Grumman Avenue in Newark, Rabbi Herson became the Rebbe's chief emissary, chief shaliach in New Jersey, always looking to the future, always looking to the ideas of expansion and growth for this great institution. As I said, this institution was started on Grumman Avenue in Newark in a small two-family house. 30 years ago, my brother Bruce and I were honored by Rabbinical College at the dinner. And speaking at the dinner was a friend of mine, the mayor of the city of Newark, Mayor Sharp James, who has since retired. He told a story that night at the dinner that he lived on Grumman Avenue, and a rabbi and a group of kids moved in to this house 2 doors down across the street, and they were fine, but he got a notice one day from the planning board of the city of Newark that they wanted to expand. And he thought, this is enough there, we don't need an expansion. So he went to the planning board meeting and he objected. And he was well known, he wasn't mayor at the time, but he was on his way up. And the planning board, of course, sided with him and didn't approve it. So that night at the dinner, he said, I'm going to take credit for your beautiful campus in Morristown, New Jersey, because if I didn't object that night, you might still be in a two-family house in Newark. And of course, we see where we are today. When someone is in need or was in need here in New Jersey, in the Chabad community, or a friend of the Chabad community, Rabbi Herson was always there to help. He was selfless. And on one occasion, I had a very big problem this is more than 30 years ago, and I brought it to Rabbi Herson. I said, I need help, I don't know what to do, and I need help from you, from the Rebbe, and also from Hashem to get through this. So he brought me to Morristown, to Crown Heights, to 770, on about 6 occasions on a Sunday. It was always good to go with Rabbi Herson because you didn't have to wait online on Sunday. That was some line for those who didn't see it. And I went to the Rebbe, like I said, several times. And what seemed to me at the time to be an insurmountable problem that I would never get through started to clear up. And the Rebbe gave me different instructions, check my mezuzah, check tefillin. He asked me if I daven every morning shacharis, which I didn't. He says, start davening shacharis, just shacharis. And then after that, mincha. And that's how he brought me back in to Yiddishkeit, into Judaism, into being more frum than I was prior to. Rabbi Herson really saved my life in that, and I'm indebted to him and to the whole family for what he did for me and for my family. He told me a story once, Rabbi Herson, which some of you may have heard, but it's worth repeating for those that have heard, and it's certainly worth telling for those Bachurim that never heard it. So Rabbi Herson, as you heard, grew up in Brazil. In Brazil, and spoke fluent Spanish. In 1969, he and some other young Chabad boys were sent to Cuba to try to see what the Jewish community in Cuba was doing. And on January 1st, 69, they were only there a short period at that time, Fidel Castro, militarily took over Cuba. The president fled, and Castro became the dictator of Cuba and an enemy, actually, of the United States for the next 30 or 40 years. But Rabbi Herson and his friends were there in Cuba, and of course they had long beards. And Castro had a long beard, but a beard in Cuba wasn't really in style in those days. Cuba's a very hot country. They didn't have air conditioning either. And after Castro took over, people wanted to show, the locals wanted to show that they're with Castro, so they all started to grow beards. But a week or two after the takeover, their beards were only this long. These guys had beards down to here. Wherever they went, they figured these guys have been with Castro for months or for maybe years. They're in with him. So when they walked into a place, everyone stood up. They were afraid of them. These guys are with Castro. And that was, I think, an amusing story that I heard from Rabbi Herson. As we sit here today in this base medrash, I just wanted to say to the Bachurim, specifically the Talmidim here, is that this base medrash was built for you, and it was built by Rabbi Herson. This is the house that Moshe built. And when you'll come back here, Mirz Hashem, in 30 years or 20 years with your children, with your sons, and bring them in here for the first day, you'll remember this night that you were here at the Shloshim for Rabbi Moshe Herson, Zichron Tzaddik Livracha, and that it was his blood, sweat, and tears that built this building and this whole campus. And we miss him. I and the entire board will miss him very much.
The order of events will be, we'll now see a video clip which was put together, 5-minute video clip put together in Rabbi Herson's honor. Following that, Rabbi Shmuel Kaplan is with us, and he will be giving a final address with some very important announcements. We ask you to please stay. The video, please. Thank you.
Welcome to New Jersey. Welcome to New Jersey. Welcome to New Jersey.
Mooie burger van Noord.
Absoluut. هذا ما تذكر ده قلت بسويس أصلاً هذا
Mr. and Mrs. Wilfams are board of directors.
Om ik dan para zich, para zorgen para communal activities.
Nee, dat is waar hij.
For your communal activities will be successful. That's for your activities as survive of the communal activities. Naast dat slag. Dat is de meeste daar.
Get to number one. Wel beter van jullie op een hoofd. Je blijft in je schip. Moshe Herson zoekt het komt in Brazil. Een landje gezond jaren. Na tak nachos kinder und Kindskind.
Ach so sei gesehen, dass sie von der
Oh Mensch, ein landje gezond jaren na tak nachos. Ja, sehr nahe gute Sachen. Das war Salat.
Das ist mal sie.
Das ist steht, das war Salat. Dat is de moeder van de Grossen. Dat is de Grossen. Dat is de tata van Grossen. Dat is mijn kat. Praatman. Houd eens van die kind. Nee, kijk aan de reden. Ook de tekst voor hem. One minute.
Easy pregnancy and the healthy child.
Mijn nedenbraak.
De gasten, ik heb toch wel slagen. Toch, dat is New Jersey.
The neighbors knew us very well. Fortunately, we were right on the border, so the police from Hillside never wanted to come across. I'm talking about approximately 1967. I'm not sure why, but I became a favorite of Rabbi Moshe. And incidentally, I believe it remained so until a month ago. I enjoyed many a Shabbos meal at the Herson apartment with Usher in the playpen, as well as some privileges that I had as a result of that favoritism. One particular Friday, friends and I heard a rumor that the Rebbe was going to Fabring that Shabbos. It was during the month of Cheshvan, where the Rebbe generally did not Fabring. No, it was unthinkable that the Rebbe is going to Fabring without us. So what do? Friday afternoon, you run to the bus, and we're off to New York. We made it to Port Authority just at the time of the Shkia. So we took a rental box that you could take then and we put our things in, we hid the key someplace, and we started walking. And walking. 4.5 hours. We made it to Crown Heights. At about 10:30, I knocked on my parents' home. They opened the door. I davened, I made Kiddush, went to sleep, got up the next morning. There was no Fabring in that Shabbos. Well, Mitzvah Shabbos, we made a beeline to get back to Newark, hoping that somehow we would get away with this escapade. Sunday morning, Moshe calls me into his office. Now, his office was the back porch of this house with a little heater to keep the place, give it some warmth. He was looking down at his desk, and he said to me, "You left yeshiva without permission? So I am suspending you. You must immediately go home and have your father call me before you come back." And then he looked up at me and gave me a big smile. This was quintessential Reb Moshe. Integrity demanded that I suffer the same fate as my chaver. Nevertheless, I deserved a smile. To me, Reb Moshe personified integrity. Integrity as a person, integrity as a yid, integrity as a chassid, integrity as a menayel of a large institution, and above all, integrity as a chassid and shliach of the Rebbe. If we look at the meaning of this word integrity, it approximates in Lashon Kodesh the word emes, truth. The Torah tells us that every person carries with them a tzelem Elokim, the visage of the divine. But there is yet a higher level. There is what we call Chesomei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the seal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that seal, Chesomei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Chazal tell us, is emes, is truth. Truth and integrity. Reb Moshe, together with the Tzelem Elokim, carried with him Chesomei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that seal of truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, shlichus is a unique kind of project. It never becomes acquired by the shliach. You spend a lifetime in shlichus. And to whom does that shlichus belong? It belongs to the Rebbe. Reb Moshe never forgot that for a moment. He was a shliach, and his shlichus belonged to the Rebbe. The Rebbe personally chose Reb Moshe as a shliach. But now, the Rebbe's shlichus must continue. Continue until the mission of shlichus is fully accomplished. The Chazal teach us that Bro Kara Davua, a son is a limb, a thigh of the father. In this case, we have a bro who is not only Kara Davua in potentia, but Kara Davua for the last decade and more. And that is his son, Reb Mendel. I am therefore here and pleased to be here tonight as the official representative of Merkez Li'inyonei Chinuch, the custodian of the institution of Shlichus on behalf of the Rebbe. And I have formally announced that the Merkez has recognized Rabbi Mendy Herson as the Memale Mokim of his father, the Shliach Roshi of New Jersey, who will continue to lead Shlichus in the state of New Jersey, alongside with a special Vad of Shluchim. And we'll continue the Rebbe's Shlichus until the mission is completed with Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu, the Korev Mamash. Mazel Tov.
It's a time when we have to close such an event, a time when we have to go away with taking something for all of us to take to heart from everything that has been said this evening, and the bracha that we want to give the whole family, B'Rosham Rabbi Mendy Herson, as far as the shlichus is concerned, that Yarech HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimehem B'Tuvu B'Ne'imim, the Eibishter should give to the entire Mishpocha and to the broader, all those who are part of the Moistis Chabad in New Jersey. We've just been through another difficult time. Rabbi Chazanov is here, and the Eibishter's Logeb, that Daloi Golus, that everything that we have been through so far has been more than enough, and Yotzegeven Alazachen, and the Korev Mamish, we should go together with the Rebbe to fulfill everything that we've been working for. The Rabbi and Mrs. Herson worked for all their lives, and dedicating themselves to the Rebbe's Shlichus and the Rebbe's Inyan, Lahovi L'Moisa Mashiach, and bring down the Shechina, L'mata Me'asor Tvachim, that this should be realized quicker than Keheref Ayin, and that we should all together, with health and nachas and gesund and everything that our heart desires, go gesundheit and freiligkeit, lekabel pnei Mashiach tzidkenu b'korev mamish, and we should meet together on simchas and freiliche zachen. Thank you.